So here's the next update on the Chevy K10. On my seat tracks, the wire that connects the sliders, so when you pull the release handle you can slide it back and forth. Mine was actually broken, so I went to Ace and I got some of this wire. It's music wire. I brought one of the survey flags with me just to compare the thickness, so this matches the same thickness of the survey wire. But I ended up just copying the ends because there's a little spring that goes there in the middle which clamps that together. It wasn't not real hard to do. A pair of pliers, the spring sits in that little groove, and then I twisted it up to hold the spring on. And since my welder broke, I gotta get a new welder. I initially was just gonna weld the two ends together because these only come in maybe 3 feet, 2.5, something like that. They're not long enough to span from one side to the other side. So I was gonna weld them together, but welder's dead, so I ended up using the same method I did on the seat bottom with all the wires that I did, the same hook loop style to connect the two wires together, and then 2 hog rings in the middle of it. But I did another change. That's the wrong shift pattern for my 4-wheel drive, and I don't really like the whole box, and the boot doesn't look that great. And then for the transmission itself, that's the shifter boot for that. It's real big and bulky. I mean, it took up a lot of the center of the floor. So I ended up going to Advance, and I got 2 of these plates. The chrome trim that comes with it is like sheet metal, so you can't really use that to screw it down with. So I ended up taking my steel plate. It's pretty thick. It's maybe 2 millimeters, a little bit more, 2 millimeters or 1/8. So I just cut out 2 squares, basically the same size as the box. I just kind of made it so that the corners match the chrome trim that came with it, and so that the boot itself doesn't sink into the big hole for the 4-wheel drive, the transfer case. I only made a rectangle, enough for the shifter to go forward and backwards, and just enough room so it doesn't tap against it, so it supports all of the boot. Same thing on the transmission itself, just a small square for the transmission to stick up through, and so it doesn't tap it. So the plate supports the boot so the boot doesn't fall down. Then, since I already had the clutch pedal and brake pedal out, I replaced the bushings for those, and when I put it back together I used silicone on the sleeves where they ride on the bolt, and then also on the bushings where the bushings ride on the sleeves. And then inside of the brake pedal and clutch pedal, the cylinder itself, I put silicone on there so everything can move freely and not make any noise. Well, I got the seat as good as it's going to get. I think the upholstery itself is just too big. That's what the seat looks like. The bottom came out good. Adding the 2 layers of moving blanket fixed it. It does have some wrinkles on the side. Some people say it shrinks. I don't know if it's going to shrink that much, but it works for me. If you want a show truck, then maybe you'd have to do a little bit more work or spend a little bit of money on better upholstery. But with the wrinkles on the side and then on the top, there's about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch air pocket, so we just kind of flap. So what I ended up doing was grabbing where I hog ringed it, and with my other hand smoothing out the front side and pulling all the slack to the back of it. So the back looks really ugly. You can see it's got a lot of play in it, but it keeps everything, keeps the front looking good. Getting in and out of it, it's not pulling it back up. Once these sit for a while, they kind of stick together. So I'm not getting the pocket back in it. So that fixes that. But on the front, you can see all these little wrinkles that are not coming out. They don't just go flat. But before, it was a big slop mess like that. So at least I got it so it has tension all the way across. And then you can see my gear select handle has now been welded onto the seat track release. So that looks pretty good. Doesn't hit the seat, it's out of the way. After I basically welding that is when my welder died. So at least I got that welded. That's on there. I cleaned up the seat tracks, painted them, lubed them up. And there's the shifter plates. I think they look pretty good. It looks better than what it did. On the shifter itself, it was blue, like a dark blue, some kind of. So I ended up sanding it down with 500, then going back over it with 1000, and polishing it out from there with just that blue polish that I use on everything. So it's got a mirror, a little bit of a mirror to it. That matches the chrome shifter pretty good. And this is an 85 shifter knob, because my knob for this handle is broken. So it's aluminum threads. I drilled it out the next size up and then just threaded it back onto here. So it's not going anywhere, it's on there. But I think the boots work out pretty good. The carpet's all tucked up underneath the AC box, so I ended up taking the AC box out, setting it in there, then just kind of trimming around where the opening is. It only goes so high, that's as high as it goes, but for the most part it covers it. And there's a gap there just because the trim sits down into that gap, so at least that's where it needs to be. But with all the insulation that I had in there, the carpet comes with insulation, and the insulation that came on the carpet made it so that I didn't have enough room, so this is more like that. So I ended up taking off the insulation off of the carpet and then installing it back into the truck, and then just kind of smoothing out the wrinkles. So it was a little bit of extra work, but I wasn't pulling up all the insulation that I put down. But the driver's side is about the same way as far as the wrinkles in it. You can see it'll work for me. But now I'm working on the rest of the interior parts, getting everything cleaned up and painted. I guess I should have painted the gas pedal, but I don't feel like taking it back out again. But these move nice and free. I just got to do the clutch rod. I'm working on that. I already drilled the hole for that. But when you're shifting, I mean, the boot doesn't get deformed. It goes with it. It's just a matter of lining up the hole with the transmission in neutral. That way it's in a relaxed position. Then on the transfer case, I did it with it in too high, since that's the position it'll basically be in most of the time. And then 4 high is just back, and then I have enough to go forward and it doesn't distort it. But I just made the backing plates as close as I could to the trim. And then just painted them black with some stainless bolts in there. I was going to polish them, but I forgot. You can always do it later. Just polish them with it in there. So that's about it. This side's pretty close. I was working on the rest of it. I got the radio wire ran underneath the carpet. And for my shift rod to come to the Z-bar, I ended up using the grommet for the firewall, which would be where the engine harness came through for the fuel injection. So I drilled the hole and then just used the porting bit to get it to fit. So that's perfect size. So now the rod goes through there, no issues. Just gotta find a eyelet for the carpet, so kind of finish it off with that. And then the linkage is finished for the transmission. I ended up getting some of those swivel ends, and I made a bracket for it. It was just basically trial and error. I had to re-weld the bar that connects the two rods together because it was cracking at the hole. So I got that welded and then just spaced it down. Bolted, welded on the top. It ended up being easier than what I thought it was going to be, especially with the transmission clocked down, but it went together pretty good. I didn't want the dual shifters, at least not in this point in time. I just wanted it to work. So, we'll see how that goes. That's about it. On we go.